Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion this morning, which is going to talk about sustainability trends. So we have a great lineup of panelists for this discussion this morning. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. This session is pre-recorded, so we have recorded this before, and we will have the chat feature, which should be available on your screen to ask questions. So if you have questions during the panel discussion, please type them in the chat feature, and our panelists will be able to reply to you directly there. So I would just like to go around the table very quickly at the start to just introduce everybody. So first of all, we have Tim Faveri, who is with Maple Leaf Foods. Good morning, Tim. Brian Bourquard from EY Parthenon Food and Agriculture Strategy. Emily Hennessee from the Good Food Institute, and Karen Haugen-Kozyra, Viresco Solutions. So I'm going to hand it over to each person to just give a little bit of background on themselves, and then we will get started. So maybe Tim, if we can start with you, please.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Emma. Hello, everyone. I'm Vice President of Sustainability and Shared Value at Maple Leaf Foods. Hopefully everyone knows Maple Leaf Foods. We're one of Canada's largest food companies in animal protein and plant-based protein. My job at Maple Leaf is to execute and implement our overall sustainability strategy. I've been with the company for about 6 years now. Prior to that, led sustainability at Tim Hortons, Inc.
Thank you very much. Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm part of EY Parthenon's Food and Ag team, as you said. EY Parthenon is a transaction and strategy house. We focus pretty specifically on pure play strategy and transaction support. And I work specifically and exclusively with our food and ag members. And I can't think of a conversation that I have had over the last few years that has not involved some component of sustainability as part of a company's strategy or transaction purpose.
Thank you. Emily.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Hennessee. I'm the Policy Associate with the Good Food Institute, which is a global nonprofit that leverages the power of markets and innovation to transform the food system. And we do that by accelerating the growth of alternative proteins, including plant-based proteins. So I am excited to be part of this conversation today. Thank you.
Great. Karen, thank you.
Hi, thank you very much, Emma, and good morning, everybody. I'm president of Viresco Solutions, and we're one of Canada's leading consultants in sustainability, metrics, and strategies, including carbon accounting. These are some of our clients and partners that we work for. We work with governments, we work with commodity groups, we work with corporations, large and small, and NGOs. And we'll meet you anywhere in your sustainability journey, whether it's strategy development, metrics development, or helping you set up the monitoring, measurement, reporting, verification frameworks for those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And just maybe to introduce myself, I'm Emma McGill. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Animal Science at the University of Manitoba, and I'm also a member of the Manitoba Protein Consortium. So welcome everybody this morning. So I think we're going to have some great conversation around sustainability. So we'll just jump right in with some of the questions that I have for each of us. So the first question that I have, and I will pose this to a few of you, what is needed to encourage the acceptance and adoption of sustainability initiatives within organizations and players across the value food chain? So maybe Tim, I'll ask you that first.
Sure. I think I need to concur first off with Brian's introduction and saying, this is top of mind in conversations that I'm having all the time. And it's not just because that's what I do. I think there's been a big pivot, particularly in food and agriculture. We've taken an approach to demonstrate leadership in this space. And I think one of the primary ways to not only encourage and promote acceptance of sustainability, but really to operationalize it and to embed it, is to have a good strategy. And the way we've chosen to do it is by adopting an overall social purpose for the company. Our purpose statement is to raise the good in food. And that's got great meaning to Maple Leaf Food employees all over Canada and the United States. Tied to that purpose statement is a really powerful vision, and our vision is to be the most sustainable protein company on earth. And we that from a guiding light, kind of like the North Star that the company can always focus on, has been really helpful for my job as leading and trying to embed sustainability into the culture, because if our purpose is based on sustainability, everyone is bought into it at that level, and we are able to align our business priorities, our operations, to try and achieve those goals.
Great, thank you so much. Brian, what are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Emma. I agree with Tim. I think Maple Leaf is a good example because they've prioritized sustainability, and it's more than lip service. There are kind of two components, I think, that drive a lot of this. There's obviously government policy and regulation and, the politics of the day, which are clearly driving toward a demand for sustainability. At the end of the day, it's consumers that pay for it. It's consumers that are asking for it more and more frequently. It's become a mainstream conversation among consumers. So to really push it into a company, there has to be some demand source for it. At the same time, the company needs to institutionalize it. It needs to come from the C-suite. It needs to be part of the story and purpose of the organization. And at the end of the day, companies are becoming more focused on multi-stakeholder objectives. And part of that means that it becomes part of your talent strategy. For example, you have not only roles that focus on sustainability, such as Tim's, but you also, attract people through your sustainability message to want to work for your company. And at the same time, you make it part of your goal in terms of hiring the right people. It's people that believe in that as part of their personal mission, so that as your organization grows and expands and ages into the market, it's just part of your DNA. So top to bottom, it's really important that companies focus on it, message it, empower it, make sure that the people who are driving it have the authority and responsibility to do it right, and then also make sure you communicate it really clearly to the market.
Thank you very much. Karen.
Thanks, Emma. Well, we're not a food and beverage company. We are a consultancy that helps, improve the whole sustainability profile and strategy, metrics, and journey for companies. I'm going to be speaking to a dialogue similar to the dialogue Manitoba Protein has had in the government with Keith Jones and Tavo Gurenko. We did a challenge dialogue in June 2019, and we had over 60 thought leaders following the challenge dialogue come together and discuss how we increase the use of evidence-based systems to encourage, motivate, and reward sustainable agriculture in North America across supply chains. So we had representatives of corporations, commodity groups, academic institutions, government players, solution providers in the marketplace, digital ag types of companies. And the key takeaways as we worked through how we would increase this and scale these across the supply chain, and there were farmers there too, is that the key takeaway is farm level systems, more integration of knowledge, data, and tools. From the point of view of solution providers, a lot of them have great tools, but they don't know how to mobilize them into the marketplace, right? So if we could increase interconnectivity along the players in the supply chain and build out the digital solutions, that would be important. The tacit acknowledgement of enhanced profitability, obviously making sure value is shared for whatever sustainability outcomes are happening across the supply chain. Oftentimes producers are left out of these conversations. And so we have to make sure that we're talking to the producer community as well. Absolutely being science-based, be the best science to inform the metrics, but also to develop new BMPs that can be, reducing environmental impacts or intensity, ensuring simplicity. And this is difficult because oftentimes these things are not, they're quite complex, but making sure they're fit for purpose. and then align communication, because we all talk across each other and we use different terms. And this really came from the commodity groups and the farmers in the room. It's like, you need to translate this so we understand it. And it was a collaboration of, the folks in the UK with the Coal Farm Alliance and Thesis, ourselves, and Biological Carbon Canada. Go to the website, Viresco Solutions, and you can look at a lot of the other things that came out. It was a very rich discussion. And so, that's the thing I think from my experience I'll share with you to answer your question on that one, Emma.
Thank you so much. I think some really good thought-provoking comments there to start us off this morning. So thank you all very much. Moving on, another question that we have is, how should the agriculture industry address public trust concerns surrounding the technologies that we have in place that can support sustainable outcomes? So Emily, maybe I'll start with you for that one.
Thanks, Emma. From the alternative protein perspective, I think that there's a great opportunity to really increase the diversity of products on the market and be transparent about the technologies and the production methods that are being used, and then let consumers decide what they want. I think Beyond and Impossible are two really great examples of that, where Beyond is very proud of the fact that they don't use genetic modification in their inputs, whereas Impossible shouts from the rooftop that this is part of the technology that they use. And both of those companies are doing well, and consumers have the option of choosing which type of products they prefer. And so I think as these sectors grow and more sustainable options become available, consumers are going to be able to help pick winners and losers in the marketplace, and hopefully that means a diversity of winners and very few losers.
Thank you. Brian, thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. This is one of my favorite conversations to have, especially over a few beers, because you can also get into some really great arguments about this conversation. So, first and foremost, I kind of ask us as an industry, and I've spent my whole career in food and ag, how well are we communicating with consumers, and how well are we telling the story from the consumer's perspective? For so long, we told the story about genetic modification from the perspective of the farmer and how great it was for them and their yields and productivity and profitability and so forth. But we kind of ignored the fact that we have pesticide-resistant crops, but consumers don't really want to eat pesticide to begin with. So do we communicate to them properly that this actually results in fewer pesticides being used? So that's one question. I would also ask how genuinely we've communicated with consumers, or how often, maybe another way of phrasing, how often we've obfuscated the truth. What does pasture-raised eggs or chicken mean? It's different depending on different producers, the different standards. What does grass-fed mean when it comes to beef? What does it mean to have, for example, non-GM oat milk? There's no GM oat on the market. I love picking up bags of, wheat-based products that are like wheat, salt, and water, and reading non-GMO on the packaging. And I think, well, geez, there was nothing in here that could have been GM, commercially. So I think that we've done a really poor job of telling the story from the consumer's perspective, communicating reality to them, and being very, very genuine. There's another part of this question about, are we as an industry being kind of double-sided, or are there double standards in that? And I don't know that we have double standards per se, just because I almost think that other than communicating to the consumer on price, we haven't really done a good job of communicating to them at all from a very genuine perspective. So I'm open to arguments about that, though I can see a lot of perspectives on this question. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point in how do we get that science-based information and just the facts and what is factually correct to the end user. So really good points. Tim?
Oh, it's a great question. My personal perspective about public trust in our food system is that, there's a chasm between the consumer and the farm gate, and it's been getting bigger and bigger and bigger over the years. And so consumers really aren't knowledgeable about farming practices and agricultural practices that are prevalent in the industry today. And that's alluding to Brian, that shame on us that we weren't communicating as best we could with the consumers and being transparent on that. We also fundamentally believe that in its current state and looking at societal issues that are on society right now, is that the food system is somewhat broken. And then we need to start fixing it, and fixing it fast. So, why on this planet are there 800 million people undernourished, yet 2 billion people overweight? And why does society waste 1/3 of their food? Why is agriculture tied to almost 30% of greenhouse gas emissions and 1/3 of water use? There are these areas that relate directly to sustainability that the food system as a whole needs to be part of the solution more and more, instead of being pegged as part of the problem. So, it kind of rolls up to really, really good communication, and then maintaining that public trust with consumers and society, that our practices are sustainable, or we're moving in a more sustainable direction.
Thank you. Karen?
Thanks, Emma. This, like the other panelists, this has been one of my areas where I've been focusing quite a bit. When we look at the honest efforts and developments that have happened around the public trust within the crop and livestock sector, I think we've seen some really good developments. The codes of practice with the National Farm Animal Care outlining, the use of all sorts of things, including antimicrobials, voluntary removal of ractopamine in pork in Canada. The policies in roundtables and corporates on antimicrobial things, are more and more prevalent, and communicating that to the public. Emergence of biotics for disease suppression as a result of the antimicrobial policies and drivers at the retail and corporate level. In the increasing acceptance of genetic engineering with the advent of CRISPR technologies, these conversations have been changing. In the fora that I've been in with civil society and NGOs, they're starting to accept that, it may just be part of efficiency and innovation. And, just an example, when McDonald's came to Canada to start a verified sustainable beef pilot, I was talking to the lead, and she said, now we want to source grass-fed beef, okay? So that even the retailer, who's a hamburger company, didn't understand the level of efficiency and innovation that goes on in the beef sector. So through those caring conversations, seriously, and there were a lot of them before the beef sector in Canada embraced this pilot that McDonald's wanted to do, there was the realization and emergence of the use of technology and how important that is to deliver the sustainability outcomes in the beef sector. And, having those discussions with all components of the supply chain through this then certified roundtable on sustainable beef, the embracement of technology and how important that is to efficiency and innovation, which is a key pillar in the certified roundtable on sustainable beef standard setting. To be honest with you, I think it was the greenhouse gas indicator that had the most controversy, not efficiency and innovation on the roundtable.
Okay, great. And Emily, you have another comment here?
Yeah, I wanted to add, I think Tim and Karen's comments about communication, both with consumers, but also throughout the supply chain. I think oftentimes when we talk about sustainability, the focus is really on the environment and the benefits for the environment. But there's so much potential, I think, to talk about the bottom line and how in the long term these decisions are also good for the economy as well as for individual companies. But then, there's also potential to expand that to talk about creating a more resilient food supply and food system, which I think last year we were all slapped in the face about, the reminder of the lack of resilience of our food system in a lot of ways, and, and zoonotic diseases and antibiotic resistance. So I really see this sustainability conversation, we used to talk a lot about the triple bottom line and the three legs of sustainability, which I feel like we don't talk about quite as much, but there's still so many other benefits beyond just the environment, which is extremely important. And the climate crisis should be a major focus for all, but there are opportunities to kind of, I think, tie people in and hook people to these initiatives beyond just the climate and environmental perspective.
And if I may add, I think, as I talk to participants in sustainability initiatives, what I would like to see is if we are talking about protein switching, if we're looking at, our choices around protein, and I work with Claudia Wagner-Goodell in the classroom with a lot of her students, and they're very concerned about their choices, right, of animal protein versus crop protein. And I would love to see the assessments that are on a full-scale LCA from what is the implication of switching to more plant-based protein and, decommissioning sort of the grazing and all the carbon that's stored in our grasslands globally into annual cropping. I don't think we've seen those types of apples to apples comparisons. We've certainly seen the full impact, including land use change and, removing rainforest for more beef production and all of the carbon, the burden that comes with that. But I don't think we've had a really good comparison of protein switching and what those implications are. I'd love to see those studies come along.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's a very full whole systems approach, because if we take from one to the other, there are implications and things going on at all the various levels that we have to bring into conversation. So it's not just a greenhouse gas conversation, or it's not just a water, it's all of the above. So couldn't agree more. Okay, so another question: what value do processors and retailers provide back to their producers and suppliers who adopt or participate in sustainability projects? And maybe Brian, I'll start with you on this one.
Thanks. I'm going to turn the question around to be an annoying consultant about it and just say, what markets are going to be available to processors and producers who are not participating and adopting these measures? And, I can use the term table stakes, which I did recently, and then, had a deeper conversation around what market access looks like in a future in which everyone needs to be participating in sustainability initiatives. And maybe that means, the expansion of your product portfolio. Maybe that means, better routes to market, fewer nodes in between your production and consumer. Maybe it means that, production is localized, or you have new technologies or practices, and all of these are supported across the value chain. So, to Karen's last point, taking that systems approach and kind of integrating everything into a large and relatively complex decision process. I think if you look at the history of this system, retailers, they basically pushed to the consumer what was pushed to them. Everything was kind of made available to the retailer. They made it available to the consumer. And that dynamic is changing a little bit more into a pull dynamic where consumers are demanding certain things, certain attributes in their food and certain products, and retailers are taking notice of that and pulling that back from further up the chain. So the more you get that kind of pull effect, the more I think you're going to start to see these changes occur.
Thank you. Karen.
Yeah, sorry for all the slides, but it just helps me to organize my thoughts better. So we've been participating globally in pilots and ag working groups with the Value Change Initiative with Gold Standard and Sustain Cert. And in discussions, because we all come together in those ag working groups and we talk case studies and the pilots that we're doing on the ground around the world, there's really a mixed approach in practice in how value is being provided back to producers. Some corporates view technical assistance for deploying change in practices and digital solutions as the investment that they are making. And that soon, within 3 or 4 years, the producers will realize the increased profitability and it will be a self-momentum. So that's kind of like a Mars approach, for example. In the case of, all of these corporates have to show a causal link in what they're doing in order to make a narrative claim or a reporting claim against their carbon footprint. Others are investing in the platforms to monitor, report, and verify the environmental benefits. And that's no small undertaking, because you have to be able to be rigorous and third-party verified of your systems that you're implementing. Others are putting direct investment to share in the risk of practice change. Danone is a perfect example. They have 40 pilots on dairies around the world, and they are willing to invest, co-invest digesters or other things on farm, on dairy. Then there's the other aspect of premiums for sustainably produced products. So right here in Canada, we have a consortium of retailers, Cargill, McDonald's, and others, that are providing incentives back to those operations that are going through the certification program with the CRSB. And that would be $16 a head per animal right now. So that's $16 for that animal at a cow calf. When that animal moves into a backgrounder that's certified, that's another $16 to the backgrounder. When it goes into a feedlot, it's another $16 for the feedlot operator that has gone through the certification program. So these are all the mixes of different types of value back to producers and suppliers. I share Brian's thing about market access and table stakes. In the grain sector, it's like, I don't know, those are ingredients and things. I don't think you're going to see a direct kind of consumer facing thing like that. It's hard to get premiums. It might just be market access. So that's how I see corporates doing it on the landscape.
Yeah, I want to jump in and almost front run to him a little bit and ask him from his perspective, how durable are premiums in conventional protein for sustainable or organic? I mean, from a produce perspective, we've seen the erosion of the premium for organic products, becoming more and more mainstream now. So curious for your perspective on that, to add to your burden.
Yeah, I'm not the food economist expert, but from an overall retailer perspective, who really are driving, these incredible private label brands and pushing on innovation at the product level. Retailers, I think, in particular, not only want to drive a sustainability agenda, but as well, this is a big area of risk, right? The food system is probably, if not one of the most complex supply chains on the planet. And when other industries like the apparel industry, incidents like Rama Plaza or labor, child labor, and these kinds of issues in other industries, the food industry has really stepped up to try and de-risk the supply chain. And so that's why these requirements and surveys are imposed down on the supply chain. That's basic good risk management right off the top. But what's happening, I'm seeing as well, is that along with that, great opportunities to collaborate are coming to the forefront. And those opportunities, whether they be on animal care or other sustainability attributes of our food or carbon, are just starting to take hold. And there's a reason why there are so many roundtables and industry collaborations, because that supply chain or those actors in the value chain need to come together to move forward as a value chain, as opposed to just one company doing it. I think that part of the, like you said, Brian, an erosion of some of these signature attributes like organic is because of the sheer amount of competition now in the food space. We have incredible amount of certification levels and attributes coming in on both meat, plant, and other food products all the time. And so inherently kind of relates to, I think, what we're talking about around transparency and certification and traceability. The consumer might be really confused, right? And it kind of comes back to that public trust. I think, there are hundreds and hundreds of certification labels out there. Which one do you trust? You know, what's important to me? I think for the individual consumer, it comes down to balance, right? What attributes do they hold in higher regard? What brands are they loyal to? And I think it's up to us to try and make that food shopping experience less confusing to the consumer.
Great, thank you. There's definitely, again, no shortage of options. So again, as transparent as we can be, which sort of leads into my next question. How will transparency be demonstrated throughout the value food chain in regards to claims of sustainability from your organizations or just in general? So maybe Karen, I'll start with you on this one.
There was some commotion in the house. So in terms of transparency, as Tim alluded to, there's just such a great number of certification schemes, roundtables, and they're striving for transparency. So the value change initiative on the scope 3 interventions, you know, that I've been talking about on the supply chain, there's, you know, we've got Bayer going through the second corporation in the world to get certified under Sustain Cert on their US Midwest soy corn project. So everything's posted, project documentation, the third-party verification reports are posted on Gold Standard's site and their impact registry. They're looking at alignment of the MRV systems that you're doing through validation in order to get to certified outputs and justified claims. So a lot of transparency in that process. Also, ICL Alliance, which is sort of the best practice standard setting body for the roundtables on certification. Again, they emphasize transparency and accountability. If we look at the certified roundtable on sustainable beef, following ICL Alliance best practices, they have NSF International doing the oversight of the whole certification. So they're doing audit cycles, setting them all up, the chain of custody audits, those sorts of things on how the veracity and the transparency of, you know, the claims McDonald's is making on the Angus burgers and the quarter pounders. And then we have a lot of these global reporting initiatives that Tim's been a part of for a long time in his previous life, Global Reporting Initiative, Carbon Disclosure Project, the Science-Based Targets Initiative. All these things are very transparent. So we see things moving to a very transparent process as time moves on.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Thanks, Emma. I would definitely be curious to hear from this group if anyone has strong feelings one way or the other about kind of front of package sustainability labeling and what that may look like for the industry. But as Karen mentioned, I in a previous question, I do definitely think there's a need for more life cycle assessments throughout the supply chain that are easily comparable. You know, the scope of a lot of the existing life cycle assessments, you know, don't match, and so it's really difficult to make those comparisons when you're looking at different food products. So I think that there is a big need for that from whether it's third-party groups or academics to engage in this space. Obviously, the average consumer is not going to take the time to read a life cycle assessment, but I do think that if we, you know, do move to a place where there is some comprehensive sustainability package labeling, that more research and more data that's comparable is really needed.
Okay, great. Tim.
I agree with everything that's been said. I don't know if I could add to any more. It's transparency is part of a core value that we've adopted and tried to be as transparent as possible through our sustainability reporting, through our brands, through our websites, and right up and down the value chain. So,
Brian.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to play the role of the academic for a minute, Emma. Take your job and say, you know, the ultimate form of transparency is to grow it yourself. Right? And the next best thing is to walk down the street and buy it from the person who grew it. and be able to meet them and, know everything about what they did. In the absence of that in the modern world, we've substituted it with certifications and technology that reveal to us, we hope, everything about that. And, as some of my colleagues have mentioned, there are dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of certification programs out there. Some of them have been very successful, and some of them, we don't ever hear about. So some of them that have been successful be, certain organic certifications with the Rainforest Alliance, groups like that. Some of them have been self-certified. So, there are companies that have gone through and certified that they don't have forced labor, for example, in their palm oil supply chains. And they make their they make their whole chain extremely transparent, post everything about that. So, I think we make these decisions about how do we use technology correctly? What's the process? What do consumers need to know and understand about this chain? And back to some of my earlier comments, how do we as an industry make sure it's really clear and we're not obfuscating the truth about what's been done to our food or who produced it, or just telling a story that has very little basis in reality. Those to me are how we demonstrate transparency in these types of supply chains, and obviously in the absence of growing it ourselves, which most of us don't have time to do.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And from an academic perspective, when I teach, that's a question that I ask everybody is, how do we get that information out to the consumer? The students in my class are some producers, but some are from non-farm backgrounds at all, and that's one of the big questions that I ask them is, how do you want to see this information? We know that we're being transparent, and there's all the certification and the things that we do to regulate and I guess assure best practices in our industry. But again, how do we get that information out there to those who need it? It's the $1 million question that I ask them at the start of term every year. So
yeah, and I'll add to it, Emma, just to really be a nerd, but if you go back in history a little bit, and everybody was a producer. You grew what you ate. You knew what you were going to eat for the next year because it was what grew within 50 miles of you, and that was that. Pretty easy to be transparent when everything is that local. But today, when I live in New York and my food's coming from Chile, there are a ton of nodes in that process, and it's not just telling people. It's not just telling people what was in that process. It's educating people to a level that they understand that value chain, and they understand where their food actually came from and why it had to be covered with a food safe wax, or what it means, like I said earlier, to be a GM product. So those I think are just key building blocks that sometimes we've missed in our education.
Yes,
and that it sounds like you're working on, so that's great.
Yeah, really when we talk about the technologies, it's understanding the role and the benefit and why the industry has come to use them and what has been the benefit up the value chain. So I think that's really getting that understanding, because people genuinely want to know. So it's how can we satisfy that need? So great, this is a great conversation we're having. Okay, so move on. There's a growing number of farm welfare and traceability programs. So we're talking a little bit more in line of the last question. So there's a large number of these programs in the agriculture sector. Value chain stakeholders are often unable to decide which program to adopt. Is there a need to consolidate verified sustainability? And if so, who would lead that effort? So maybe Emily, we'll start with you, if that's okay.
I honestly don't have too much to add to this one, so I think I'll pass it off to my other colleagues. Thanks, though.
Tim.
Karen mentioned a group called ICL Alliance, and I've been involved with ICL Alliance for many years, back to when I was working for Tim Hortons on the coffee side of things. And they do a really good job of trying to standardize and develop standards for certification, right? Here are the nuts and bolts and the key principles of whatever certification scheme is in the process of developing. And it even goes so far they even go so far as providing assurance standards for those certifications. Now, earlier in the webinar, I said, I think there are too many of them and the consumer is confused. I still believe that. I don't know if there's going to be one consolidated body of certification out there. Likely not. The number's still probably going to grow. But if there was, you know, a standard like an ISO that would say, if you're going to have an on-pack claim, this is what it's going to need to include, then that's something that's probably beneficial as well. I also really agree with what Brian had to say with respect to local and looking at the historical context. You know, one of the big words, buzzwords right now is not specific to animal welfare, but it's this term called regenerative agriculture, right? Everyone's talking about regenerative agriculture practices. Well, that's great, but that's a term that doesn't that just apply to how we used to farm 150 years ago, right? It's not tilling and not using synthetic fertilizers and rotating your crops. And, you know, these are just good agricultural practices that are based on the history of agriculture. So I think simplicity is in order, and whether it's animal welfare or carbon or whatever next big scheme comes out there, it needs to be grounded, one, in science, and two, in some form of standard approach.
Thank you. Karen, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, having labored in this sector for quite some time now, it is frustrating to see so many of them. There's a tracker too that I showed it to a colleague, and he's obsessed with it. He's going on every day to see the new ones that are coming on, and there's just like hundreds of them. I think it's unlikely to happen anytime soon. I agree with Tim 100%. ICL Alliance does strive for standardization, agreed. They also provide solid guidance around labels and claims and how you do that on your outcomes of your sustainability. And I can't tell you how many conversations we had within, you know, the CRSB about how we would do that. And you do have to get clearance from the Canadian government as well when you're going to make a claim in a labels of products. So, you know, it's no small undertaking to determine how you're going to do that. But what ICL also does is they put out guidance on benchmarking. So what I'm seeing in the industry is that although you may have this plethora of different standards, there's this striving to benchmark against each other to determine equivalency. And that hopefully will drive efficiency for producers, right? For example, Alberta Environmental Farm Plan, they sought equivalency with the SCI platform in Europe because, you know, as they looked around the world, they're like, which is the one that I want to be able to do a benchmarking equivalency against to say, yes, we conform with the environmental component of SCI platform. So, and CRSB, we developed the benchmarking program for CRSB. So, you know, we benchmarked the ProAction and several other standards against CRSB to determine the level of equivalency. That's where I see, you know, maybe we'll get to as this thing moves on.
Great. And Brian?
Yeah, so I really like the comments that Tim and Karen have made here. I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian approach and say maybe having a real multiplicity of options available for labeling actually drives consumer interest and makes them go to those websites and read more about what these certifications mean. And so maybe, you know, the economist in me says that that level of competition is good and we don't need to force any level of consolidation because there are different ways of telling these stories, and you know, different consumer groups might be interested in different ones. I would challenge our industry to, you know, seek certifications that are actually relevant to the product because there's so much consumer confusion about it. I was reading a message board or like a review, I think it was reviews on a particular product, and somebody said, I really wish that the manufacturers had used GM-free wheat. That was in the review, and I thought, well, there are no, you know, commercially grown versions of GM wheat out there, so I think we're safe. You know, there are Jason Lusk, who's a professor at Purdue University, and he runs a survey, and I think on his blog he had a post a while ago about having run a survey and asked consumers which products, if products that contain DNA should be labeled. I can think of salt maybe being the product that doesn't have DNA in it. So I would ask us or challenge us as an industry to use the labels that are actually relevant to communicate to the consumers about what's in our food. The last point I'd make on this is that there's so much opportunity in the space for collaboration and to get value chains kind of lined up and get all the nodes aligned so that they're all working together across one of these certification processes. But I think competition in the certification process actually drives down the cost and hopefully reduces the cost to the consumer at the end of the day.
Okay, great. So we'll maybe wrap it up with one quick question because I think we've only a few moments left. So consumers are demanding sustainably produced products. That's where we are today. How does this demand from consumer change your business strategy? So Tim, I'll maybe ask you that first.
I can't disagree with that. I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, our social purpose is based on sustainability, and that's our business strategy. So we're very focused on all aspects of sustainability, whether they're in our meat products or our plant-based products. And because of that diversity of protein products, we can cater to all the different tastes and desires of consumers that are out there looking for those options. For us, it's about balance. I think we still remain one of the only predominantly animal protein companies to come out and say, you should eat less meat, but eat it in moderation and in balance with nutritional guidelines. That is an important part of our thinking strategically. And I think consumers are responding.
Okay, thank you. Brian, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm gonna steal Emily's thunder because I love the work that GFI does. I'm gonna just ask, companies need to be willing to self-disrupt a bit, and if you are a major conventional protein company, asking yourself pretty hard questions about alternative proteins, whether those are cultivated or plant-based, and what that looks like in the future, what that market's going to look like, how you're going to respond to it. So to me, the ultimate business strategy here is to be very, very self-reflective about the disruption, to be really honest, don't stick your head in the sand, and perhaps even be really willing to self-disrupt.
And maybe our last closing thoughts, Emily, if you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brian. And Tim, I think your Maple Leaf is a great example of that. And we're seeing other big, what we used to call meat companies, now we're calling protein companies that are diversifying. And I think there's a lot of research that shows that taste, price, and convenience are still the primary factors that are impacting consumer choice. And so I think, but sustainability is obviously a growing factor, but I think the key is really to figure out that balance of how you can keep the taste, price, and convenience there, and while also addressing the sustainability issues. And I think there are a lot of equity issues that are connected to that. We want to make sure that everyone has access to sustainable products. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to make that possible.
Okay, great. Well, I just want to say thank you to all of you for taking the time this morning. I think we could have talked about sustainability for the rest of the afternoon if we had the time, but alas, that's not to be today. Again, so thank you all so very much. I think we've had some excellent food for thought. And this really is such an exciting industry and time to be in the industry, I think at least. So with that, we will wrap up our panel discussion for the morning. We will, however, have the chat feature, which should be in the side of your screen. So there will be opportunity to ask some questions, if anybody has questions, in the chat feature, which we will answer directly there. So again, thank you to all of you who took the time, both from the speaker and from the attendee this morning. It is very much appreciated. So, and I hope we have a great rest of Protein Summit. So thank you all very, very, very much for your time today.
You're welcome.
Bye now.
Have a good day.